This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Welcome back inside the pod, everybody. My name is Joel Godet, and this is Play-by-Playcast. Of course, the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. If you'd like to get in touch with the program, as always, housekeeping right off the top, you can find us on Twitter at PXPcast. You can find me on Twitter at Joel Godet, JoelGodett, or you can hit me up via email as well. I'm at JGODETT, jgodet at bsu.edu. Something a little bit different on the podcast today because we don't have a play-by-play announcer for you. We have instead an analyst, and this is something I've been wanting to do for some time now because we talk a lot about the perspectives of working with an analyst, obviously from the play-by-play side of things on the podcast. I think the first time this is an idea really kind of dawned on me, and you've got to go back, I don't know off the top of my head, 20 episodes or something. We had Chris Carino on, the radio voice of the Brooklyn Nets, and we did a lot of discussing his interactions and his relationship with his analyst, Tim Capstraw. And that episode in particular, we do it on a lot of episodes, but that episode in particular kind of got my gears churning about working with an analyst, how to better your relationship working with an analyst, how to get the most out of your analyst, how to set them up to be most successful, et cetera, et cetera. And we did that with Steve Jones as well a couple of weeks ago, I think last week. We did that with Steve Jones from Penn State as well. So I wanted to get the analyst's perspective because I thought that would be interesting. What makes you better? How does a play-by-play guy help make you better? What makes a great play-by-play guy from your vantage point? All of those questions and perspectives from the guy that sits next to us usually. So to do that, I figured who better to go to than one of the best guys out there, especially with college basketball season coming right around the corner. We're a month away from college basketball tip-off. So Jay Bilas from ESPN is our guest today. Jay, of course, has been one of the lead, if not the lead announcers, color commentators for ESPN for some time now. He's been with the company since 1995. He started in radio, was on radio with Bob Harris, friend of the pod, at Duke in 1993, and then, of course, has done some CBS work as well with the NCAA tournament and worked with Dick Enberg, and we'll talk extensively about his games with Dick Enberg and looking up to guys like that and other guys that he's worked with on the podcast. So without further ado, because you did not come here to hear me ramble, you came here to hear Jay Bilas break down his side of things on a broadcast. We dive right into it today. This is Play-by-Playcast, and our guest is Jay Bilas.
Well, I don't really remember where I got the bug. I mean, I think I had always thought it would be a fun thing to do after I was finished playing, and I always had an interest in it. So I started working, when I told some of the coaches that were recruiting me when I was coming out of high school that I was interested in it, a few of them actually put me in touch with some of their alums that were influential in broadcasting, and I got a couple of jobs as a production assistant. I was basically a runner while I was in school in college during the summertime. So I'd work. I worked for ABC Sports, and I worked the Olympics in LA and where I'm from, and Monday Night Baseball and the PGA Championship in golf in 1983, stuff like that. And I kind of learned the business, and that's where and I learned the business from behind the camera to the extent you can as a production assistant. And I really liked it, and I thought it would be something I'd like to pursue.
How'd you get good at it to the point where, what was kind of your study of, I'm going to take this seriously, and, if I'm going to take it seriously, here's what I've got to do to do that?
I don't know that. Well, first, I don't know that I am good at it, but I don't know that I did any type of training for it, except in other ways. I took, based on my mom's urging, I took a bunch of forensics and public speaking courses when I was in high school, and I did some drama training when I was in high school. At my mom's urging. And then I think law school actually helped me quite a bit in the practice of law, where you had to stand up in front of a judge or a jury or an appeals panel. And it allowed me to think on my feet, and I had to deal with some complex issues without a whole lot of time to be able to spit it out. So I had to be efficient. And then I started working in radio when I first got out of law school. And I think radio was really good training ground, because you have to paint a picture in radio that people can't obviously see. So the play-by-play person takes the lead, but you certainly have to have some economy with words to get your point across. And I think that was very helpful before I got into television.
Give me the perspective from your seat, because on this podcast, we obviously talk to a lot of people that sit next to you. But what's it like for you in terms of the play-by-play analyst relationship, in terms of what makes a good one and what goes into creating that relationship long-term?
Well, I think what makes a great play-by-play person is the ability to set the scene. And I've worked with the best. I've worked with Sean McDonough and Dan Schulman and Dick Enberg and Brent Musburger and Mike Tirico and you Dave O'Brien, you name it. I mean, I'm leaving people out, I know, but I think their ability to capture the moment, not only provide information, but to set the scene at every turn. And then the people I've worked with have been so selfless in helping me do what I do best. And so I think they're able to sort of set you up to be able to shine with whatever knowledge you can bring or whatever you can add. And I think they're great teammates. I mean, all the people I mentioned and all the folks I have the privilege to work with have done such a great job of that. But really for an analyst, sits beside the play-by-play person. I think one of the things I've always been proudest of, and Bill Raftery and I talked about this after that 6 overtime game we did with UConn and Syracuse back in the day, was that we didn't get in Sean McDonough's way when it was time to call the big moment. We were there to analyze certain things and add what we could, but it was Sean that needed to handle every big moment, and he did. And we were really proud, not only of Sean, but we were proud of ourselves for staying out of his way, because when you look back on those highlights, when people put packages together on that amazing game, we're pretty pleased that all you hear is Sean, and we thought that's the way it should be.
If I can go back to one of the things you said off the beginning of that, in terms of the people that you work with helping make you better and helping set you up so that you can do the job the best that you want to and that you can. What's the key to that from your vantage point? How do you feel best set up, and what do you think draws or creates the best opportunity for the person in your chair to do what they do?
Well, I think you have to have a feel. You not only have to be prepared, but you have to have a feel for what's going on. And the fact that, and I think this has been somewhat of a struggle for me over the years, is you don't have to analyze every play and every dribble. People are not tuning into a clinic; they're tuning in to watch a game. And I try to put myself in the position of the basketball fan who may be like me as a football fan. Like I love football, but I don't know, truthfully, that much about it. I'm just a casual football fan that knows, like every red-blooded American that watches football, I know just enough to be dangerous. I'm not out there like John Gruden, calling out, when they're in, in cover 2 and all that stuff. I don't know all that. But when it's explained to me from time to time, I find it really interesting, but I'm not dying lousy on every play to know, did they just run spider wide banana 3? I don't know that stuff nor care. And so I try to keep that in mind, that while I probably know more about basketball than the average Joe, I don't want to bludgeon them to death with clinic discussion on every play. And so I think for a play-by-play person, kind of opening you up to allow you to do some of that X and O stuff when it's appropriate. And then other times where you're just two people kind of talking about a game so that other people can hopefully enhance their enjoyment of it. That's really the goal, is to help a viewer sort of enjoy or enhance their viewing experience. And so you always try to keep that in mind, that you're doing the game for the fan. You're not doing it to show how much you know, if that makes sense. Are
you more of a, I guess that being said, are you more of a conversationalist, or, do you want to be asked direct questions in terms of pointing things out, or do you just want to be two guys at a bar watching a game, if that makes sense?
I'd like to be two people at a bar watching a game, but if my partner wants to know something, I want to be asked the question. And I think all the broadcast partners I've had have been so good at, if I say something that maybe they want clarification on or more information on, all of them will ask, but they also have a great feel for knowing, they may know the answer, but, they may hear me say something and say, you know what, he needs to explain that better so that somebody at home understands it. So they may ask a question, for the benefit of the viewer, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I know that happens because, Dan Shulman, Sean McDonough, they always do that. And I think it's really helpful. And those guys, all the people I've mentioned and others, have such a great feel for the game and feel for the broadcast. I mean, they're consummate pros, and they're great teammates. I mean, that's really what it winds up being about is, you call each other colleagues in different businesses. So they're my colleagues, but the truth is they're my teammates. And, in any sport, in any endeavor, you're going to try to do the best you can to make sure that you do your job and help a teammate do his or hers.
Have you ever gotten a question you didn't know what to do with, and you're just kind of live on television and trying to figure out where to go?
No, I mean, if I did, I just say I don't know. I just answer it because I think there may be times you don't know. I mean, I think sometimes you're asked, what's going to happen here, and heck, with all the film you watch, you don't know exactly what's going to happen. But you can lay out the options and maybe, hey, here's what they've run before. Here's what they may look for. That's the hardest question, is to try to be a predictor of what's going to happen. And sometimes sometimes you don't. And then it's just, when it's just a question of, will they execute it? And other times, teams scout really well. They're trying to run something different to keep people off balance and all that stuff. But that's usually the question that in the late game situation, when there's a timeout, when somebody asks, okay, what's going to happen? What do you expect here?
Is there a better way to address that? Because I feel like anytime I go into a timeout, the automatic crutch is my partner's David. I look at him, I go, well, Dave, what do you do here? Is there a better way to set somebody up for that so that you don't just walk into that every time?
Probably not. Just because it's the hardest question doesn't mean it's not the right question to ask. So I don't know is not a bad answer there, because if you don't, but usually in the course of a game, where the ball should go, and just like in a football game or baseball game, an analyst may have a good idea where the pitcher wants to throw this pitch or something like that, or the pitch the batter may be looking for. But it doesn't mean what's going to be thrown every time. I mean, heck, if you knew that, we'd probably be coaching. And even the truth is, even the coaches don't know what's coming. So it's that's another thing where you want to balance. If you can point something out and say, hey, here's something they've done in the past. Or if I see, usually the times when I've been, good at predicting something is when you see an alignment that they've run before, and you can say, hey, they usually run this to get this result. But most of the plays and actions that are run, in a college game, or there are multiple action plays. And so they're not just looking for one thing, and they're kind of read option, to borrow something from football, kind of read option type of plays where take one thing away, they've got another option to counter it, and you can't always. So that's another thing where what are you going to bog down the broadcast by trying to predictively diagram an entire play? First of all, you don't have time, and second of all, you're probably not going to get through to too many people, and it might be that's one of those situations where it might be overkill.
How do you prep? And how do you prep in conjunction with who you work with, in terms of how much of what Sean knows do you want to know? How much of what you know does he want to know? Or is it sometimes better off if you don't know?
No, I think it's always better off if you when Sean and I work together, same thing with Dan Schulman and all the others, we're usually together at practices and workouts and all that. We have different roles, obviously. So the play-by-play person may have a story that I didn't have, or some background that maybe I didn't have, because I'm concentrating on some other things. It's usually true that I'm going to have more sort of basketball related stuff than straight X and O stuff or things like that. Now I bring kind of a lot of background knowledge from my years doing this, that sometimes something will stick out to me that I've had for a while and I may use, and same thing with a play-by-play person. They may have some background stuff that you haven't heard yet. We don't use everything we have in every game. So something you may learn about a team in early in the season, you may not use till later in the season, or about a player. But I don't ever try to surprise any partner of mine. It's not that. But there are times when you'll say something, but usually you kind of have a feel for, that's more a story. That's more a story that's for Sean. And I'll give you an example. Like when Sean McDonough and Bill Raftery and I were working together, we had a three-man booth. Those can be really difficult because everybody has to make sacrifices. And with those three guys, or that particular three guys, there was no sacrifice that I ever felt like I was making. I can't speak for the other two, but it was such a pleasure to be with those guys. It didn't matter that, maybe the game wasn't done the way I would do it if I were the sole analyst, or it wasn't done the way Raftery would do it if he were the sole analyst. We each made sacrifices for the others. So if there was a steal and a great dunk, I didn't have to worry about that. I let Bill take that, and he could send it in and do all the amazing stuff he does. And oftentimes, if there was an X and O point, I would take it. Not because Bill doesn't do that. He does that as well as anyone who's ever done it. I happen to believe he's the best that's ever done this. But we kind of developed like some go-to roles, and it didn't mean that one or the other didn't take it from time to time. But we kind of had a rhythm going, and Sean was the storyteller. So Bill nor I would get up and tell some background story about a kid and his family. Sean was the master of that. We could never even approach him. So we never ventured there. And so it was three people who had a very sort of defined idea of what we were good at, and we also knew what our colleagues' our teammates' strengths were, and we played to those, and it worked out really well. And the fact that all of us are certainly healthy egoed individuals, but we didn't let that ever get in the way of the sort of the team, and that's why I think that worked so well. Saya and the last component was we're all such great friends. It was just that was the ultimate of sitting at a game watching with your friends. And so many people have told us individually and together that that's the way it felt to them, and that was a really gratifying compliment to get.
How long does it take to figure that flow out? Obviously to get that's the pinnacle, but to get to a point where you're comfortable working with somebody.
I've never been uncomfortable working with someone. There have been times when you could tell it clicked. I mean, with Raftery and McDonough, it clicked the first game for me. They're probably wondering when it was going to click, with me. But it was really fast with Dan Schulman and with Dave O'Brien and Brent Musburger, all these guys, Mike Tirico. It was an amazing. They've all been amazing partnerships, and working with Rhys Davis. Like, I've never worked with anybody as good as Rhys Davis in the studio, and doing games with them is a pleasure. But there's almost no. I can't think of anybody I wouldn't say that about as far as it being a pleasure. Everybody's different, so it's a different experience each time, and it's maybe a different rhythm. But I think when you go into the game thinking about, well, let me make sure I stay out of the play-by-play person's way when it's that position's time to do something. As long as you're mindful of staying in your lane, I don't think you're ever going to have too much of a problem.
What's your communication system like in game? How much are you talking in breaks in terms of direction, in terms of thoughts, or like, hey, Dan, I saw this, I want to go in this direction? And I'm sure there's parts where you're communicating in the truck with that too, but how much of that goes on and course kind of changes and corrections go as a broadcast evolves?
It really depends on the game. A lot of times we're trying to make sure during the course of the game that we're comfortable and things are going the way we want. Like Dan Schulman, it seems like every couple of breaks he'll say, everything good? You getting in enough? Everything all right? And I'll always joke by saying, I'm never getting in enough, Dan. Like, you're totally freezing me out. And we have this kind of running joke where we'll say, I can't remember which one of us asked that question or this question, but one broadcast many years ago, one of us said, are we missing anything? And the response was, well, how would we know? I mean, if we're the ones missing it, how would we know if we're missing it? How could we identify it? But so we've always had a laugh about that. But we're always thinking about, are we doing this the right way? And are we striking the right tone? And, I've always felt like at least in my job, that in my position as an analyst, like, my job is to say the right thing at the right time in the right tone. And I try to be mindful of that third component of tone, because you can say the right thing at the right time, and if it's not in the right tone, it's misunderstood. And I used to have this. I used to say this all the time, and when I stopped saying it, and I stopped using it as a rationalization. But I used to say, sort of, I'm responsible for what I say, not what you hear. And then I stopped saying that, because if I say something in a manner that you misunderstand it, then that's on me. It has to be within reason. I mean, if you unreasonably, take something I say out of context or decide, not to process it in a normal way, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. But I'm always thinking about that. Like, am I saying the right thing? Am I saying it at the right time? And am I saying it in the right tone? As long as I cover those three bases, I think I'm usually going to be okay.
I'm curious about kind of what you're saying in particular too, and we touched on it a little bit, and it kind of goes back to, probably should have asked it off the top. But when you're sitting down, and we talked about the being analytical and X's and O's and kind of how you can approach it and get into too much or not enough, and the lanes that you want to be in. But what is perfect analysis to you in terms of? I mean, are you just what's right? I mean, kind of what's the right bowl of porridge for you when you're looking at everything?
That's a good sort of a good metaphor to use, because what's just right. What's too much, too little. What's just right. And there are some times when you don't have to say anything, and maybe that's the perfect commentary. There are other times where it requires explanation. There are other times where it requires for you to make commentary that goes beyond what you see on the floor. It all depends, and that's where your feel comes in. And you asked before, and I probably didn't ask the question very well, or answer the question very well, about my preparation. Like, I do a ton of preparation. I watch a lot of film. I put together these really detailed scouting reports and charts. But the preparation I do is to fill my tiny brain with the information I need for the game. It's not to have an agenda for the game, if that makes sense. So I don't know where the game's going to take us. I want to be prepared for every eventuality if I can. But what I really want to do is be confidently prepared so that I can just watch the game and then react to what I see. And that's always my goal in a game, like react to what you see. And usually if I've prepared myself properly and I'm in a good frame of mind when I start the game, if I'm healthy and all that, not bothered by anything, I'll be able to handle all that. And you may have a way of looking at the game. Like a lot of times we'll have it framed and say, okay, what's at stake and all this other stuff. And so you might have something you think your plan before the game, we're going to focus on these things. And then the game takes you in a totally different direction. So you've got to be prepared to pivot. And that's where your preparation comes in, because you're not, I'm not wedded to some script or something. And if I don't, oftentimes in a game, you may only use 10, 20% of what you've prepared. But so what? I mean, it doesn't matter. And you just don't know which 20% you're going to use. And I always know that everything I do, everything I prepare for, I will use it at some point during the course of the season. So if I don't need to force anything into a game. If it doesn't fit, I'll wind up using it later. Like we've got, we're very fortunate, or at least I'm really fortunate at ESPN. We do a ton of games. I'm on television more than any human being should ever want to be. So I'm going to get the opportunity to say what I need to say during the course of the year. If it doesn't fit into one 40-minute game, the world will still spin on its axis. I'm almost positive.
It's a journey, obviously, for all of us in terms of how we progress, how we get better, how we move up, and kind of along the lines, we always kind of think we're good, but we could get better. If you could go back to like 33-year-old Jay Bilas as an analyst and say, you're pretty good here, but these are the finer points that can help take you to that next level. What are the things that you learned beyond the point where you kind of figured out that you can do this and you've got a handle on it, but that make the difference between kind of where you were then and where you are now?
It's a great question. First of all, I would have been more grateful for my hair back then. I think I would have been more mindful of those three things that I had mentioned before about saying the right thing at the right time and the right tone.
Sure.
And to have been a little more patient. That you're going to have a long career as long as you stay healthy and all that. So it's not that important that you swing for the fence on your commentary. And I do think that oftentimes in these games, the less that is said, the better. And if you go back to at least when I was a kid, I'm 53 years old now. And when I was a kid, Pat Summerall was like, to me, the gold standard of play-by-play guys. And, obviously I grew up in Los Angeles, so I used to listen to Chick Hearn with the Lakers, and Dick Enberg used to do UCLA games when I was a kid and did the California Angels. And, he was the gold standard, as was Vince Scully doing the Dodgers. So I got to listen to those geniuses and maestros when I was a kid, and I think oftentimes the less said can be the best. I think we tend, and I'm the worst offender of this, is you tend to overanalyze, overtalk when a better economy with words would be the smarter route.
That seems like a good foray to we have this conversation a lot in terms of play-by-play on this podcast with differences between radio and television. You said you started in radio. What are the differences you found in your side of things from radio to television?
When I was working with Dick Enberg, he said something that I thought was really, really brilliant and true about radio. He said that the true artists are on radio, that television is really color by numbers, that people can see what's happening on television, and you're just there to enhance their viewing experience. And on radio, you have to paint the entire picture. And he was, and I think still is, even though he just retired, Michelangelo at being able to paint the picture for a listener. When I was doing radio, I was as I always have been, I was the color analyst. And so I really thought that my time to get in and add something was after the play-by-play person, and I worked with a guy named Bob Harris, who's a legend, who just retired at Duke.
Oh, yeah.
When the ball went through the net and he gave the score, before the ball got to half court, I had some time to add commentary. And then during free throws and maybe a stop action, I could say something. Other than that, it was Bob's job to paint the picture of where the ball was, ball moving left to right across your radio dial, all this stuff that he did so brilliantly. But that was a requirement. He had to do that. And if I got in his way or if I tread into his time, it wasn't going to hurt him. It was going to hurt the listener. And so I was mindful of my role, and then, as I mentioned before, about being efficient in a short amount of time to get in what I wanted. And there were certainly times, like every basket did not require me to comment on it, and that was helpful, I think, too, for me when I moved into television.
When do you talk on television for you to feel comfortable? And that goes, through, talking through baskets, talking through plays where, at the end of the day, how important is one layup when it's 4-0 to punctuate a call if you're the play-by-play guy, in terms of creating that comfortable rapport where it sounds like two guys watching a game, but at the same time you're not, as you've talked about earlier, stepping on those bigger moments?
Well, that's a really perceptive question, because I think that's the struggle that you always have is, are you gonna document every little thing in the game, or can we have a conversational call of the game? I think there's a pretty marked difference between the way an NBA broadcast sounds and the way a college basketball broadcast sounds. The NBA, it's obviously a 48-minute game, and there's a lot more up and down action. College is a slower game. We've only had a 30-second shot clock for a year now in men's college, and the NBA has been 24 seconds. That was a 16-second. That was a long difference in the way the game was run. Now it's just 6 seconds, but it was 11 seconds before that, and that's a lot of time. And so you're dealing with a lot more plays, a lot more shots. And so there were times where, maybe if Jeff Van Gundy and Mike Breen are doing a game, Van Gundy may be saying something, and there may be two baskets in the time he's trying to spit a sentence out, and you never hear Mike Breen interrupt, to say, hey, basketball, LeBron James. But at the same time, if something crazy happens, something really important, what story is important enough where you don't let the play-by-play take it over and document it? So that's another feel thing. But I do think you're right. Like the conversational part of it, of two people watching a game, is an important thing to be mindful of all the time.
What do you do when you make that judgment in your head? Like, will you just stop if you deem it, like, in your mind, this is a big enough moment, I've got to get out, let me get out, let whoever I'm working with get in? And I guess that's probably a feel thing too, working with each other over time.
Usually you don't have to. Usually the play-by-play person's the smartest one in the room, so they'll just grab it, and you don't have to worry about it. So that's not a concern, and I've never been really worried about, if somebody, you have a moment like that where you're talking about some story and then something happens. If you have an incident, maybe a fight starts or something, who knows what it may be, but then, your little story is no longer, or anecdote is no longer, the top thing on the agenda. It's really not that hard. And I think most people, most listeners get it. They're not, it's not the Lincoln Douglas debates, it's not that big of a deal.
What makes the great ones great to you? Any of the guys that you work with, what do you think differentiates any one of them from, there's lots of us out there that are trying to become them, that separator?
I don't know that. I think it's different with everyone, because everybody has different strengths and different things that they bring to the table. All of them are technically sound, but some may have better pipes and a better command of a moment. Others may be better at sort of the nuts and bolts. They may be funnier. Everybody has different strengths. But when you think about the people that, you've always enjoyed listening to, it's not that you go, oh, I loved Pat Summerall because he did this one thing. It was usually a feel that you had for the person and what that person made you feel. And I mean, I think when I mentioned Summerall a couple times, when I think back on Summerall, like as far as economy and efficiency, economy with words and efficiency, who was better than Pat?
Yeah.
All Staubach to Pearson, touchdown, and that did the whole thing. What else needed to be said? And you're kind of going, why can't I do that? That sounded so good. And it was 8 words. I mean, it takes me 22 to say hello. Stuff like that. You have different people that have different, like Sean McDonough. I've never worked with anybody as good as Sean. When there is a moment of capturing not only what happened, but the emotional level of it. It still rings in my head in the Syracuse UConn game when Sean said overtime number 6.
Yep.
Just stuff like that. And then the Michigan State football game last year, where that crazy punt, and sideways punt, and the guy runs it back into the end zone, and Sean's voice was cracking. And he laughs saying, "Oh man, listen to that!" And he goes, "Listen to that. That was awesome." He didn't think it was that great, and I was like, "That was one of the best things I've ever heard in my life." Guys that have that kind of feel and are so talented that in the moment they just knock it out of the park. And that's the way Shulman is, and McDonough and Tirico, all those guys are just so brilliant.
The funniest thing about that, and it's funny you bring the 6 overtime game, because the 3 things that come to my mind are the overtime number 6 coming up, the nightmare for Paul Harris always still rings true in my head, and then the other one is when Devendorf hit the shot and Sean yelled, "They will check it." And we were playing a football game against Illinois, I don't know, 6 weeks ago. It was the opening week of the season, and we're driving down the field to try to win the game with a minute left, and our quarterback got sacked and fumbled. And the immediate thing that jumped out of my mind, I just yelled, "They will check it." And I just punched myself in the leg. I'm like, that one's taken. But it's those moments that stick with you when I think they're done really well. So it's interesting to hear you go back to those. Who are your mentors in this? I mean, you mentioned guys like Pat Summerall and Sean and other people that you've worked with, but did you have anybody you looked up to on your side of things?
Yeah, I mean, one of the people that was really helpful to me when I first got started was a gentleman by the name of Chuck Howard, who was one of the big wheel producers at ABC back in the day when Monday Night Football was king, and he gave me my first job in television as a production assistant, and I worked with so many great people at ABC that were so kind to me, and Amy Smolens was tremendous, and folks that taught me here's how you're a pro. Here's how you're a professional. And Dave Miller at ESPN gave me my first job, and Lee Fitting, and really mentored me was able to kind of, like a great coach, was able to give you help without micromanaging things. And I would say another one would be Lee Fitting at ESPN, who used to sit in the big chair to produce College Game Day, and was a tremendous influence on me for how to do the job and do it right. And then the guys that I've worked with, I mean, Sean McDonough's been amazing, an amazing help to me, as has Bill Raftery and Dan Shulman, and then being able to work with Dick Enberg was an incredible treat. And he's somebody that I met Dick when I was in college, when he was doing our games, and I got to spend time with him, and got to know him, and he's been a tremendous influence, not only for how to do the job, but how to conduct yourself, as an example for how to conduct yourself off air, because there's no finer gentleman that's ever been in this business.
There's one question I want to end with, and it's about as broad as it possibly gets. But I'm curious, if you looked back, games that you've done or moments that you've done that you're I guess, proudest of, and the Syracuse one I would imagine is toward the top of that list, but other things that you've been a part of or seen that you liked, that were amazing just to be a part of, what still rings with you?
There have been so many. The 2005 Elite Eight game between Arizona and Illinois was a tremendous treat. That comeback by Illinois at the Rosemont Horizon there in Chicago. I did that game with Dick Enberg. I was able to do Dick Enberg's last college game, which was an incredible honor. And I actually did Brett Musburger's last college game. Oh, wow. So I'm probably not going to be very popular with play-by-play people because they might think, hey, is this the last one? But I would say those, and then I've been involved with the NBA draft since 2003 for ESPN, and I think I've done every single draft that we've had, and that's been an incredible experience for me. And it's been a growth experience because when I first started, I think the times where I made mistakes, it wasn't so much like you're always going to make a misjudgment here or there about thinking a player is going to be good, he's not that good, or thinking a player is going to be not that good, he turns out to be a Hall of Famer. But sort of the in the right tone thing. I learned a lot about that. You're trying to say something quickly and authoritatively, and sometimes you wind up getting the tone wrong, and that makes the message wrong sometimes.
Jay, I appreciate this a ton. It was awesome to pick your brain, and I thank you for doing it and for letting me into your world a little bit. And I don't know what I can ever do to repay the favor, but I appreciate it greatly.
Cash is always good.
Yeah, I'm only a mid-major announcer so far, so it's not going to be a very large check.
Just for now. That's
fair enough.
That's not always going to be the case.
Many thanks to Jay Bilas for joining us here on the pod. One of the other things that I think today, or this episode, is helpful with too, is how to relate to analysts you work with, particularly when you're working with new analysts. I've done that a lot in my career, be it football or basketball or particularly volleyball. Since I've been at Ball State, I've worked with a lot of people that have been new to broadcasting. And the thing that a lot of people, you'll run into with a lot of people that are analysts, especially when you're dealing with former athletes, is they're used to being coached. So if they're new to it in general, they're easy to, hey, this is what you do here. Hey, this is what you want here. Hey, if you said this way, or instead of just saying this, describe it in this way. They kind of want that feedback a lot of times. So it was interesting to talk to Jay today and kind of get the perspectives of the things that he's figured out being an analyst and the feedback systems and what it's like getting on the same level as the guy or woman that you're working with. So fun to have Jay on, and hopefully it makes me better at what I do in working with the people that I work with. And hopefully it does the same for all of you as well. And hey, it relates to what Steve Jones said from Penn State last week on the podcast, is never be afraid to work with somebody who makes you better. And that goes for all of us out there. Never be afraid to work with an analyst that makes you better. And I think applying a lot of what we heard Jay talk about today can go a long way toward helping us work with people that make us better, helping us make people that work with us better, and vice versa as well. So many thanks to Jay for joining us here on the podcast. Our guest next week, we will go to the NHL. Dan Duva will be our guest on the podcast. He is the newest voice. Well, he's one of the newest voices in the NHL. A couple of new guys got hired this offseason. But he is certainly on the newest team. He is the first radio voice in the history of the Vegas Golden Knights, and Dan Duva will join us on the podcast next week. A lot of really good guests coming up also, so stay tuned. We released some of those names on Twitter, but looking forward to the next couple episodes of the podcast. In the meantime, it's a week until we talk to you again, so until then, so long. This has been Play-by-Playcast. Thanks to Jay Bilas, thanks to you, and we are out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.